The Blockstream app is your gateway to financial freedom on Bitcoin. Built by the team behind more than a decade of Bitcoin innovation, it's the easiest way to buy, secure, and manage your Bitcoin. Download the Blockstream app and start stacking straight to self-custody today. The future of finance runs on Bitcoin.
Welcome back to Bitcoin Capital. Today we're talking to Anthony Scaramucci, founder and managing partner of SkyBridge Capital and chairman of the SkyBridge Alternative Conference. Anthony was one of the first mainstream institutional investors to allocate to Bitcoin. And if I remember correctly, he caught quite a bit of heat for it. He's also the author of The Little Book of Bitcoin, a graduate of Harvard Law, and I think one of the most articulate Bitcoin advocates with roots in traditional finance. Anthony, welcome to the show.
It's really good to be here. I love your memorabilia on the wall. I mean, you got it going on.
Thank you very much. Kind of exposes my bias a little bit, but I guess it's good to put it out there. So jumping into it, so you were one of the first big recognizable kind of institutional names from traditional finance that I recognized that it allocated to Bitcoin. So I wanted to ask you what drove that decision, and then what kind of reaction did you get from that decision initially?
I got torched, I got pilloried.
Yeah.
I got decried. I was told that it was internet magic money and that I was a loser, and my clients were upset with me. The wirehouses, that was the thing. And we have a relationship with the wirehouses. They're very arbitrary and capricious. You have one bad quarter, they'll fire you immediately. You could have a 15-year relationship with you. There's an expression on Wall Street: you're only as good as your last trade. Nothing is more true than if you have a wirehouse relationship. They could care less about you. And so they put a sell on the fund. Lots of clients redeemed. My fund shrunk. So I think we peaked. There were reports that we were at 9 billion. We're actually never at 9 billion because we had like 5 billion from Citibank that we were getting like 5 basis points on. So that was not really, we had to report that number, but that wasn't really our assets. So we peaked at about, say, 5 billion. And we are now at 3 billion, but we went as low as 1.5 billion, Jesse. And that was a decision that we made. We said, okay, this is going to 10x. So should we stay in traditional finance, direct lending, mortgage-backed securities, and creep along at a 3 to 5% return where everybody's mad at us? Or should we get everybody really, really mad at us and flip the card table over and get into the digital asset space? So we did that. Lots of people were mad, lots. I mean, it would be wrong for me to tell you that they weren't. And then look at, I'll show you something here. The New York Post decided that I was a clown. I mean, I am a clown. But they decided I was a clown, and so they had a architecture, caricature of me sinking in a Bitcoin boat.
Oh my God, that's so perfect.
And so my buddies, because we got comedians all over the place.
Yeah,
they had this made for me, this bobblehead, right? So it was really bad, and I was really, I believed. And I believe more today than I did 5 years ago,
sure,
Jesse, but I'm not going to be one of those, BS artists on your show and tell you that I was, I believed and I wasn't leaving the position, but did I have some self-doubt creep into my decision-making alongside of my team? Yes, I did. I'm not going to pretend otherwise, because that was a delicate, difficult period of time for us. So today our revenues are quadrupled. Our assets have growing again. Our balance sheet, because we're running SkyBridge like a Bitcoin treasury. So our balance sheet has, just under 9 figures of Bitcoin on it, and it's we try to add 1 to 2 Bitcoin a month into the balance sheet.
So that was 2019, was it? Is that right? 2018 or 2019?
Correct.
So what gave you that? I'm sure you had an inclination that you were going to get some pushback on this. What gave you that conviction?
Let me be precise, because it was conversations 2018, 2019. The first Bitcoin that I purchased was in October of 2020.
Okay.
It was after COVID. So I watched what happened to Bitcoin during COVID. We almost made this is how, because you mentioned we were institutional investors, we were traditional finance people. This is how delicate it was for us. We debated it for over a year. After COVID, I turned to my friends, my staff, and I said, "Hey guys, we're gonna flip this into Bitcoin and other potential digital assets." You know, for whatever reason, we never got on the Ethereum bug, Jesse. I do own some Solana. It looks like, I'm just looking at your visage here. You look like a total Bitcoin maximalist. And by the way, I see myself as, even though I own some Solana, I see myself as a Bitcoin maximalist. I just, because of my traditional finance roots, I believe this stuff is going to get tokenized. And I think it's going to run on a blockchain rail system that's going to look like Solana or Avalanche, maybe Sui. Okay. And so I own that because I think that's going to be part of the rail system. If you are, maybe not you, because it looks like all you do is own Bitcoin, but if there were other
easier.
People, right, exactly. But I mean, people that are going to trade stocks and bonds, they're going to trade tokenized stocks and bonds. And I believe that they're going to be on a rail system. And because of my traditional finance roots, I own some of that, but I'm really from a purist. And I wrote a book. I don't know if I have copies around me, but I wrote a book called The Little Book of Bitcoin. I had the forward written by Michael Saylor, which really just took people through my personal odyssey and SkyBridge's odyssey into Bitcoin, starting out as skeptics, not understanding it. Michael Saylor himself admitting that he was a skeptic in the beginning, didn't really understand it. He got there in August. I got there in October. Our two businesses converge. Obviously, he's a little bit more aggressive than me, but
maybe than anyone else on the planet.
Exactly. But I mean, he's the man, and I love him. I think he's been unbelievable for us. I think he's explained it about as well as anybody. He deserves all the kudos and the wealth and the success that he's created. And but he's also been a Sherpa, if you will. He's taken us up the Bitcoin mountain, and I think we have a long way to go here. I think people really still don't understand. Like, you're a Bitcoiner. I go to these Bitcoin conferences and I try to give the Bitcoin people a newsflash. You're a small group of people. Okay. You think you're the people. You think everyone's into Bitcoin. No, my generation, my demographic, they still, and I repeat, they still don't understand it. My generation, my demographic is still followers of Jamie Dimon and followers of Warren Buffett.
Sure, I was going to say.
And so just imagine if we can penetrate that group of people. Just imagine if we can open them up to the idea of Bitcoin. Now, Larry, of course, what a great story. 2021, I hate Bitcoin. I'm going to make an investment in Circle. Of course, he's done very well with his Circle investment. And then he pivots. So think about the neuroplasticity that you need. I'm told Bitcoin is rat poison. I'm told it's a decentralized Ponzi scheme. I'm told that it's worthless. And yet it's not, obviously. And yet you have to then get your arms around the network, the brilliance of Satoshi's white paper, the unhackability of Bitcoin. You have to get your arms around the immutability of Bitcoin and all of the technical properties that Bitcoin has that represents pure value exchange between individuals. Because what is it really? It's a decentralized, hardened, fully transparent spreadsheet. That's what it is. But by the way, what is your bank, Jesse? Your bank is a big glorified spreadsheet with fancy logos. Okay, that's all it is.
Not censorship resistant, though.
well, exactly. Exactly. Not censorship resistant, not subject to centralized authorities who regulate these banks. And by the way, this is why the stablecoin legislation was problematic in the country. I'm glad it passed, and I think it was a step in the right direction. But they won't let these guys put yield on them. That's the American Banking Association. So the stablecoin guys have a one-to-one backing of your money.
Sure.
Jesse, let me ask them, do the banks have a one-to-one backing of your money?
No, they do not. Okay, and they're not allowed to. I don't think they're allowed to. The full reserve banks, I think there's been a struggle in the US to get those approved. Right? There's been a number of efforts, and people want that.
Yeah. It's a fractional reserve banking system, which is subject to a crash every 15 years. which requires governmental intervention. But if you're going to compete against that, you're going to have full reserve stable coins. What do you think is going to happen? The money's going to flow out of the banking system into full reserve stable coins that are offering you a yield. Okay. And that business model is going away the same way that long distance telephone calls went away. We can make these calls costless. You and I are talking like George Jetson right now.
Yeah.
And we're doing it costless because you have an internet cable. I have an internet cable. You're on the other side of the world.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm, notice how I said
12
you're on
hours
the
apart.
other side of the world. I'm in the center location of the world, Jesse. I just want to make sure you understand that. Okay?
Yeah.
No,
I understand. No, I've been to LaGuardia. I've been to JFK. It doesn't feel like those airports are the center of the world.
I'm kidding. Believe me, they look like third world. Actually, I think we're all impressed with LaGuardia. I told my wife that they finally fixed LaGuardia.
Did they? I haven't been there for a while. Yeah.
Okay, Jesse, I said, babe, this place is so nice. We may go out on a date here on Saturday night. I mean, I was walking around LaGuardia. I was like, whoa, this is but JFK, forget about it. It's like a cesspool over there. But you get my point.
I do. Just another, like a funny thing on that. The last time I was in LaGuardia was 2018. I was working for an Australian investment bank called Macquarie. And I landed in LaGuardia and I thought, I'm based in Taiwan, so we deal with a lot of Asian money. And I thought, what are these, and that was China kind of at its peak, right? What do these Chinese cajillionaires think when they land in LaGuardia? What do they think? And they're told that this is the center of capital markets globally. What do these guys think? But, that's an aside.
Well, I mean, but it still is, right? I mean, it's still the center of capital markets globally.
It is definitely 100%.
So but the question is, did the politicians run the thing right? How much money leaked out of the system?
Yeah.
If you saw the taxes that the people pay here, you'd be like, well, you remember, taxes should be a price for services, but in this country, in this city, they're not. So because if they were putting the money, talk about reserve banking, how much of the tax dollars actually goes into a road or an airport or the infrastructure in the local neighborhoods? And the answer is very little. And it's embarrassing for us, to be honest.
Yeah, no, it's a global issue, right? It's a global issue in the West. But you said quite a few things that I want to dig into. First of all, though, I feel like, so you got into just tying it back to the original question, which is only my first question of 15, by the way. I don't feel like we're going to have enough time.
I'll talk faster.
You mentioned that you got into Bitcoin at the end of COVID. Was COVID a driver for you? Because I feel like there was kind of this tinder that had been building within the system for a generation, right? Various different factors compiling. And then COVID felt like it was the match to just kind of like lit everything, right? And kind of exposed everything. Was that your perspective? Was it everything that happened around COVID that pushed you into it, or what was it?
So I it's so hard to say now, Jesse. That's why I'm hesitating. Because I remember our conversations in 2018 and 2019. I'd like to think that we would have made that investment with or without the COVID-19 pandemic. Maybe not, though, because maybe the status quo was pretty good. You know what people do, Jesse? When the status quo is pretty good, what do they try to do? They try to maintain the status quo.
Yeah.
The great leaders, the guys like Jobs, Bezos, they break the status quo. Okay, they don't like status quo. They're like, okay, Steve Jobs did something I always marvel at. He took a very successful piece of equipment called the iPod. Do you remember the iPod?
Yeah.
And he dropped it into the iPhone. And he said, "What did you do that for?" He said, "Well, I had to do that. If I didn't do that, someone else would have done it." In other words, he destroyed his own product, right? He didn't sit on it like Pacific Bell sat on the yellow pages. They had the data center and they had the technology to create Yahoo, but they didn't do it because they thought that chopping down 40,000 trees and creating 4-pound phone books dyed yellow because they had done that successfully for 95 years. They thought that was going to continue. You see what I mean? So I would like to say that we were bold enough to do that with or without COVID, but I'm not sure. But if you're making the point that COVID was a catalyst, it was, because you got to see what was going on in the markets. You got to see what was going on in the governments. And you were like, okay, we're drunk driving. We're drunk driving with central bank currency. We're drunk driving with our spending. And this Satoshi Nakamoto computer programming team or computer programmer figured out that he could take the drunk driving keys away from people if he could create adoption. And so I wanted to be a part of that. And also I wanted to be a messenger for that. So there was a combination of things. I remember when I went on CNBC the first time to announce that we made a large sizable position in Bitcoin, I thought the anchor was like ready to like reach through the screen. And I was doing it over like in one of those studio boxes. I was going to reach through the screen and like, what are you, an idiot? Why are you embarrassing yourself on my network, literally, you know?
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to dig into was the idea of tokenized securities. That's one of the questions I had prepared was, what do you think's next after the ETF? We obviously have a lot of people looking at stable coins. You mentioned you're interested in tokenized securities. That's my day job. I'm, head of operations at Bitfinex Securities. We're an RWA and security token platform. So what are your thoughts on that?
We need legislation in the U.S. We need the market function regulation. We need some guidance from where those tokens are going to be housed, for regulatory purposes. Are they going to be in the SEC or are they going to be in the CFTC? If you said to me today, do we have the technology to do this? We do have the technology to do this. Is the regulation behind the technology? It is. Are there resistant forces that are very powerful in the lobbying community that can prevent this, that can create a slowdown in tech? So this is a little bit off target of the conversation, but hear me out for a second because it ties back in. The money is flowing from the big companies and the big banks and the big businesses into Washington. Since Citizens United, a floodgate of money is opened. And so what ends up happening is whatever these people want, they get. There are 7 tech companies. Many of those at this point would have been broken up by Teddy Roosevelt. But they won't be broken up because they're funneling money into the big coffers of the Senate and the presidency, et cetera, and they won't get broken up, but they need to be broken up. And you say, okay, this guy sounds like an anti-capitalist. I'm not. I am a capitalist. When we broke up AT&T was sitting on an enormous amount of tech. The great irony, without the breakup of AT&T, you don't get the 7 big Mag 7 tech companies today, because they were sitting on tech related to the internet, sitting on tech related to the conference call, video conference call. They were sitting on all types of tech, and they were doing that because they were a monopoly and they were the one game in town. And that's happening with places like Google and places like Meta and places like Amazon, even on the cloud. And so you need the breakup. Said differently, why is Bitcoin so successful? It's fully decentralized, and you need to create more decentralized tech so that people can work on it together and get it to grow faster. And so the tokenization thing is being held back by status quo parties that are funneling lots of money into the regulators and preventing the tech from beneficially taking over for us. We should be able to trade a stock between ourselves off the grid. 5 minutes later, it goes into your wallet from my wallet, fully secure. When I started in this industry, Jesse, because I'm a lot older than you, I started in the industry, it was T plus 5. Trade date plus 5. Now then it went to T plus 3. And then it went to T plus 1. Now it's still T plus 1. It should be T plus 0.
It should be.
How about 5 or 10 minutes? Right. So that's the problem. It's being held back,
Yeah, that's kind of my perspective too, that these kind of incumbents have dug super deep moats, and probably where tokenization of securities is going to evolve the slowest is unfortunately going to be in the most developed capital markets, right? In the US and probably the G7. So I think this is a big opportunity I think it's a big opportunity for smaller economies to kind of catch up and close the gap, and maybe for capital centers like, Dubai or the Middle East that are, embracing the technology, and then also are capital centers in their own right, for them to really kind of plant a flag in the ground.
It's a really good question. I have to think about it. I mean, you're in the business. What do you think before I answer, Michael? I mean, you're going to.
I think so. I'm not sure what's going to happen with the Trump administration. The first couple of weeks, everything seemed to be wide open, right? There was the strategic Bitcoin reserve. There was lots of talk about what was going to happen with that. I kind of feel like and then now that we have stablecoin regulation, They ended choke point 2.0 to some degree. I'm not sure how effective that was completely, because the banks are naturally, you probably know this as well. I think they're reluctant to interact with the digital asset industry just because it's potentially a competitor to them. But I think securities regulations are going to change really slowly in the developed markets, and probably faster. I mean, we're regulated in a financial center in Kazakhstan and in El Salvador. So we're out on the periphery and looking to attack this problem from the outside in. And I think that's probably where you'll see a lot of action, but that's not where the capital is.
Right.
So it's tough to say. I think it's still an open question.
Yeah. So I'm probably not the best guy to answer it, and your thoughts on it are probably more accurate than mine. Let me just step back and provide a framework from my life experience, my governmental experience, and so on. What I would say to you is that the strong are now eating the weak. The strong are now eating the weak. And so the people that are in power, if they want something to happen, they can push the money into the system and they can make it happen inside the system. So the strong are eating the weak. The Bitcoin idea, the reason it's catching on is that the weak hate that. Okay. And the weak will always, the Bible actually says this, the weak will always eat the strong eventually, right? I mean, there'll always be a toppling. If you want to take advantage of weak and poor people over time, they get together and they topple you because there's a very small group of powerful people at the top, right? And so that happens. And you can see that throughout history. So I would caution people, they should be moving to where you want things to go more quickly, because where you want things to go is fairer for the society. See what I mean? And so, but this is the dilemma that we have. And so guys like Teddy Roosevelt, they got that. They broke up the trust. They broke up Rockefeller. They broke up Standard Oil. Reagan got that. He broke up AT&T with Judge Harold Green. In order to have the thing flourish, you've got to have everybody doing well. Henry Ford understood that. He was like, all right, he was a racist and in many ways a bad guy, but he was like, I got to make sure that the people that are building these cars are going to make enough money to be able to buy the car, and they're going to have a nice single family house somewhere and a good school system. I don't want them descending on my Dearborn, Michigan mansion with a tiki torch and a pitchfork, right? And so what you're talking about is a flattening, fairer system, okay, a more open system.
Yeah, more inclusive.
More inclusive, but it will take economic rent away from certain big players, and so they're going to fight it every step of the way,
tooth and nail. Yeah. And so I guess the big event, of the last maybe one of the biggest events in Bitcoin's history is the approval of the Bitcoin ETFs. We waited for that for a long time. It had a pretty big impact on the market and on Bitcoin price. What's your sense of how that changes people's perception? You got a lot of criticism in 2020 from your initial Bitcoin investment. What is it like now? It feels like the whole thing is flipped, right?
Yeah, well, silence. You think anybody's writing an article and saying, Scaramucci's 5-1 on his Bitcoin position, and Scaramucci rode it to the bottom and stayed in every Bitcoin, and it's now 5x where it was?
You didn't get a gold star?
No. Do you think that there's a yacht out there like this? Look at me. You think I'm driving around in a yacht, or am I? You don't even remember something about the media. When it bleeds, it leads.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But if you're doing well, they're not writing that. Why would they write that? And by the way, I don't need them to write it. I don't really give a shit. I'm just saying to you that, like, you want to be on the frontier. You're going to get some arrows shot at you. You're going to be in the covered wagon, rumbling along, and some good and bad things are going to happen. But you think about it from this perspective. You get there, the land is yours. And to use a Michael Saylor, there's digital property. It is Manhattan.
Yeah.
Peter Minuet is buying it from the Native Americans for $24. He's buying the entire island of Manhattan. That's the piece of real estate. And that's where we are right now. Do you want to own some of Manhattan? Go in right now at $105,000, which is cheap, and buy Bitcoin. Okay. So right now it's Manhattan instead of 1624. When Minuet did that, it's Manhattan 1690. It's not Manhattan 1990. It's Manhattan 1690. And so to me, you either see that and you do it, or you don't see that. And I'm sure there were people back in the 1690s and said, wow, this is overpriced now. I can't believe how much development's happened on the island of Manhattan.
But what do you think the consensus view now of Bitcoin is? So in 2020, the view was it's nutty, magical internet money. What is it now? Is it a hedge on inflation? Is it like digital gold? Is it like a risk asset? How are people looking at it, do you think?
Such a great question. So I think that they are still not looking at it, if I'm just being totally serious.
Yeah.
You're looking at it. I'm looking at it. Most people are still not looking at it. Again, just being totally serious. But when they do look at it, they're like, whoa, this is a storage of value mechanism. It trades 24/7. It can be a hedge. It could be a liquidity deposit for me. It could be, okay, I'm going overnight on these trades. Let me pump several $1 million into Bitcoin. Okay, the weekend is coming.
Yeah.
Maybe we're going to be bombing somebody. Maybe something crazy is going to happen over the weekend, right? Watch Bitcoin over the weekend, because what happens is it's so liquid. If you're a macro trader or you've got other trades on,
Exactly. Yeah.
Bitcoin may drop over the weekend as you're trying to hedge yourself, or Bitcoin may go up over the weekend as you're trying to take on more. I think Bitcoin still is, in my mind, it's transitioning from a risk asset and a tech asset into a store of value. And so there's a little bit more anti-fragility to that. And I can point to when it happened, when Silicon Valley Bank cratered 2 years ago, Bitcoin popped. And everybody was like, whoa, why is Bitcoin popping? Bitcoin's popping because people realize that the fractional banking system is less sturdy than Bitcoin. You know, Bitcoin is one of, okay, we torched Bitcoin. We had Gary Gensler. We had Elizabeth Warren. We had Joe Biden. You pick the obstacles that Bitcoin has had. We've had wars. We've had market turmoil. We've had budget fights, and Bitcoin grinds and Bitcoin grinds. Bitcoin is at 105 against every odd imaginable.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, you know, it's like, I can't remember the name of that law, but the longer it lasts, the more durable it is. There's some kind of positive.
Is it the Lindy effect?
Lindy effect. The Lindy effect. Yeah. That's what it's called. Yeah. The Lindy effect. So listen, we're here now. I haven't sunk in the dinghy that they put me in yet. I'm not saying, who knows, maybe I will. I've been humbled by life. I've been humbled by markets. But what I'm confident in is that there's a very large group of people that want some freedom from the system. It's a very large group of people that want some independence. And you live in a part of the world in Asia where parts of Asia, the people don't have a lot of confidence in their central bank fiat currency. And the United States, Europe, the United Kingdom, even though we have inflation and we don't like the inflation, we still have confidence in those dollars. I can still go to the Mercedes-Benz dealer and give them US dollar. They're going to give me the car. You know, I can still buy the piece of property. But there are parts of Africa, there are parts of Latin America, there are parts of Asia where you live, where people are like, okay, these guys are nuts. They keep inflating the money. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I did. And you know what's interesting about that is that, like, this is an interesting about Tether, is it's such like a free market experiment, is that even in places where you think that people want their own currency, like Europe, the Euro Tether never really took off. It was always a fraction of USDT, of the tokenized US dollar. Even Tether Gold I don't even think it's up to $1 billion yet, tokenized gold. And Tether is what? I don't even know, 130, 150 billion. Just everybody wants US dollars. Isn't that kind of interesting? It's even in Europe, everybody just wants the dollar.
So I love Tether. The US authorities didn't love Tether. They're starting to come around to Tether. And I love Circle. And I fully disclose I'm an investor at Circle. And those two things are actually helping the US dollar, because Tether has more treasuries on reserve on its balance sheet than Germany and Japan now. You see what I mean?
And China's not buying, Russia's not buying.
Right.
You know,
that's the other thing. That's the other thing. You know, Rand Paul said something. I mean, I like Rand Paul. I mean, I think he's nuts.
Yeah.
He's a quirky guy.
I think he's less nuts now. I remember
Less nuts now.
Like,
but Rand
no, I
Paul
mean,
said
when I
something-
thought he was nuts 10 years ago, but I feel like I've kind of started to understand his position now.
Yeah, he's still nuts. But Rand Paul said something that I actually really like repeating, and I got to give him credit for because he said it. I didn't say it. He says, if the Chinese aren't doing it and the Chinese hate it, we should probably be doing it, right? And this was like when China knocked Bitcoin out. This is a couple of years back. Maybe it was 21 or 22. They canceled all the mine. Right. They said, okay, you got to go. No more mining in China and no more transaction. And they banned Bitcoin. And so Rand Paul is like, all right, so we probably should be like all over Bitcoin. You know what I mean? And And I just love what he said. And by the way, you know this because you live right there. How many transactions are happening in China related to Bitcoin? Huge. And how much of the mining, Jesse, is going on in China for Bitcoin?
Well, I think
even though it's banned, Jesse, it's banned, but they're still doing it.
They're still doing it. Yeah. I think that was a big driver for the reason why Bitcoin mining was so big in China is because people were trying to get money outside of China and it was hard to get hundreds of millions of dollars outside. But in the manufacturing center of the world, you could buy hundreds of millions of dollars of power purchase agreements and ASICs and data centers. And then you can convert that energy into hundreds of millions of dollars of Bitcoin overseas. I think the capital controls in China were a massive driver for the Bitcoin mining industry, which is kind of, there's just so many interesting rabbit holes on Bitcoin.
Well, here's the thing I would say to you about everything, and I think you would appreciate this. I have been wrong about so many things in my 36-year career. I am so grateful for Bitcoin. I finally believe I've gotten something super right? Everybody says you need that one mega trade. You need to buy Tesla when Elon is buying it from the guys that he bought it from. You need to be a part of the commercial space industry at day one. You know what I'm loving right now? I got in. I didn't get in as early as the OG people, but for a U.S. institutional investor, I'm 61 years old. I bought my first Bitcoin at age 56. I'm an old fogey, but I got there ahead of the other old fogies. Do you know what I mean?
And that's great.
What's that?
I think that's great.
Finally, I know I'm probably sound like I'm patting myself on the back. I'm not trying to.
Not at all.
Because I've gotten so many things wrong, Jesse. I had the Uber guys. They come in to see me. It's at like a mine. It's like, I don't know, it's like a $500 million valuation. I said, okay, what's going to happen? There's an unknown driver in an unknown black car is going to drive my 16-year-old daughter around Manhattan, and they're going to charge my American Express. And that's what we're going to do. And he said, yeah, that's what we're going to do. Okay. And how much you want from me? Well, we want $500,000. Get the fuck out of my office. Okay. So that $500,000 would be worth like 50 million today.
Yeah.
Right. Because I'm an idiot. I didn't see it. But
well,
the fact that I tripped on this and I had enough life experience to see it, I am patting myself on the back because I've had so many tire tracks on my back. I've been run over by things that I missed. I told people at an AI conference, I missed Amazon. I was there for it. I was in a meeting with Jeff Bezos. He was talking about, he said, you know why we send out books? I said, no, Jeff, why do we send out books? Because they're roughly the same size and weight. And I'm not an internet bookseller, by the way. I'm just trying to dot plot the United States with an easy thing to ship, to figure out where the marketplace is, to figure out where I should put my big warehouses. I'm going to sell everything. I'm just starting with books because it's easier because they're the same weight and they don't cost that much to ship. Right? And people are saying this is an expensive internet bookseller. And then Warren Buffett came on after that and said, oh, it's a very nice presentation Jeff made, but can you believe his company is worth more than Sears Roebuck? Look at all of Sears' real estate. Yeah. Look at all of Sears' hard assets. Yeah. And then I said, okay, Warren's got to be right. I'm not going to buy it. So if you bought the IPO and you put $10,000 in the IPO, it's $22 million today.
Yeah, but I think Bitcoin is even better because it's an optimistic view of the future. It's not just like one winning trade. It's 100%. I think one of
Well, you're 100%. But here's the thing: I would tell your viewers and listeners, I would say get off of zero. and you're probably off of zero if you're listening to Bitcoin Capital. So add to it.
Yeah.
You got to wake up. Okay, I did something really smart at 18, and that it was very hard to do, but I did it every month. I took a little bit of my money and I bought the U.S. stock market. I read Burton Malkiel's book, Random Walk on Wall Street, and I said, okay, I'm not going to be able to pick the winners and losers. I'm going to buy $100 of the S&P 500 in a mutual fund. They eventually became ETFs, but I'm going to do this every day. I'm going to save a little bit of money and I'm going to do this. And I tell kids today, save a little bit of money and put it into Bitcoin. I got to tell you this story. I hope you don't mind. Okay, I'm pulling up. I'm going to the Fanatics Fest. Okay, where all the because my kids love this shit, and I got to get autographs. And I'm pulling up to the Equinox Hotel, and I'm going to give the kid $100 and let me leave my car there so I can walk across the street to the Javits Center. I opened the car door. The guy goes, he says, "Mooch?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Oh, I'm, Raphael, blah." He goes, "Oh my God." He goes, "I got to give you a hug." He goes, "I've been listening to your videos. I got $50,000 in Bitcoin right now. Every month I take these tips. I take them. I put money in Bitcoin last 4 years."
Oh, that's great.
And I just looked at him. I was like, I hugged him and I walked away. And my wife's like, "Do you know the guy?" I'm like, "No, I don't know the guy, but he listened. He's got some money in Bitcoin."
Yeah.
But Jesse, the look on his face of independence. Okay, Bitcoin is about freedom, Jesse. Bitcoin is about independence. And the look on his face was like, it made my day. You know what I mean?
I do. Yeah, I know we're tight for time. I want to ask you a couple more questions about the strategic Bitcoin reserve.
Yes.
So I think this is something we were very, very excited about, kind of like the ETF. I think the ETF had a bigger impact than I probably would have guessed. It feels like the SBR has had less of an impact. Why do you think that is?
Well, it's had an impact because they haven't sold any more Bitcoin like the Biden administration was doing. And so that cuts the supply. I think David Sachs is a brilliant guy. I want to give him credit for a lot of the things that he's doing. He's a very honest broker of these things. But I think David Sachs went to the president and said, we have to make this bipartisan. So if you read the executive order, they're not going to use US dollars to buy it or tax revenues to buy it. They're buying it from different things, or they're saving it, or if they have a lawsuit that they win,
they're mostly confiscating it.
They're confiscating, exactly. They have a lawsuit that they win.
Yeah.
If they take it off of like a Silk Road transaction, they'll keep it. But I think it's very important because we have 28 things in our reserves right now, including petroleum and gold. We have medical equipment. We have rare earth minerals, all different types of things in our reserve. And every one of those things is nonpartisan. Meaning, if Jesse, you're a Democrat,
Neutral,
I'm a Republican, we're not arguing about whether or not we need gold or oil in our reserve. We both know that we do. For some reason, Bitcoin was politically polarized, primarily, we don't have the time to go into it, but primarily by Warren and Gensler. And so we need to reduce the polarization of it. This is why that stablecoin legislation, I like. It was like, 68-33 maybe, was it? I think that's what it was. Okay, right? Or 68-30 or something like that on the vote for the stablecoin legislation. And what I would say to you is, let's let it become bipartisan. Let's let a couple of election cycles go, and then let's have a Democratic president say, "Hey, just letting everybody know, I've added $100 billion to our Bitcoin reserve to shore up our Bitcoin against our gold positions." You see what I mean? Or I let go some gold and I swapped it for Bitcoin.
Yes. Yeah. I think they have the flexibility to do that. Yeah. I think David Sachs has explained that. Do you think Trump understands Bitcoin?
No, I don't think he understands it. But I think he's a great look, I don't like the guy. I think he's misguided on a lot of different things. There's no need to have this type of reality television drama going on every day. It's great. It's great for the podcast business, though, right? My Racist Politics podcast blows up because he's so crazy, right? But no, he doesn't really understand it. But he's a great politician, and he understood that there was a seam. He understood that there were no non-Bitcoin voters, and there were a lot of single issue Bitcoin voters. And he also understood there was money there. So he's like, this is stupid. So what do you mean? If I say I love Bitcoin, they're going to send me money? Yes. Oh, okay, great. Let's do that. You follow what I'm saying?
I do. I think that makes sense. I had one interesting comment from an investor in the UK. And he said, I asked him, doesn't the SBR kind of blow it up for other countries to do the same thing? And he said in Europe, probably no, because people over there, I'm Canadian, people in Canada and Europe hate Trump so much that the big killing gets wrapped up in that. And it has the opposite effect for a lot of those countries.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that could be accurate?
Yeah, I do. I also think the meme coin stuff is hurting. I think the meme coin stuff makes it look sloppy. And the money, he's a grifter. Come on, he's a presidential grifter. He's not, look, he's done some smart things. Okay, maybe the bombing will turn out to be a smart thing. I wasn't in love with it when he did it. Maybe it'll turn out to be a smart thing. He's done some smart things. I hate the tariffs. I think the rigmarole of the tariffs going up and down and sideways is not helping the economy. There's room to cut those rates. The Jerome Powell's not going to cut the rates until he gets more visibility on the tariffs. We could be ripping right now, but he will not allow us to rip because he needs attention.
Yeah. All right. I know you got to wrap it up. Last question. I think your 2025 price target is 200.
Yeah.
Are you still comfortable with that?
Well, I mean, it's going to probably overshoot that. Okay. So if I was going to adjust, I would be adjusting on the way up. My price target's 200 because I see the demand, and I'm making an assumption that the political landscape calms down. But if you get a couple of things going right, it could easily go to 250. There's no supply for this thing. Yeah. Okay, let me tell you something. There's people that need to buy this. There's sovereigns that need to own this, and there's no supply. So what's happening right now is you're getting a little bit of a churn here because of the political volatility and the macro volatility and the lack of foreseeability on rates. You pass the big, beautiful spending bill, you're going to add $3.1 trillion of deficit spending in the U.S. over the next 10 years. That's called print, baby, print. It's not drill, baby, drill. It's print. So how is it possible that Bitcoin's not going to go to 200? So just said differently, 200 is a $4 trillion valuation, market capitalization for something I think is an asset class. That's what, 2 Amazons? Yeah. Bitcoin's going to be worth 2 Amazons when the U.S. government's printing like that. I think it's very cheap. So yeah, I think it's 200.
And like you said, we're still early. There's not a lot of people looking at it relatively.
Just imagine if they get in the swimming pool, Jesse. You can have all kinds of signs behind you when that happens.
Look like a NASCAR.
Yeah. You're going to have all kinds of signs behind you. You're going to have like Mobil adds Bitcoin, Exxon Mobil. You're going to have all kinds. Exactly. Right. You're going to have the NASCAR of all the publicly traded companies that have Bitcoin in their treasuries.
Yeah.
That's going to be your
exciting
future,
times.
brother. Hey,
all right. Okay. I really appreciate the time. I hope we can do this again. It was a great conversation.
You invite me on, I'll be here. Okay. I really do appreciate being on.
Excellent. I appreciate it. All right. Have a good